Well, what is going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to dive in talking about 6 baits that I think that are going to help you catch more bass during the wintertime. These are baits that I've been using for years to catch large, small, and spotted bass. During this period where the water has dropped below 40 degrees, anywhere between about the mid 30s to the 40s, we really want to start targeting what mimics a shad. So during this time, shads start dying off just naturally because the water is cooling down and they just can't survive as easy. So if you know anything about wintertime fishing, the bass can be very tough to catch if you're not targeting them the right way. And they're very unpredictable. A bass could literally be sitting on the very bottom in this cold water and not really want to move, or they could be out feeding before a storm or a front that's moving in. They're just very unpredictable. You don't know if they're going to be moving or not moving. Also, water depth. You hear a lot of myths out there about wintertime fishing. The fish like to go all the way to the deepest part of the lake, the deepest part of the river. Yeah, it can be true, and there might not be some truth to it. They're just unpredictable. You don't know if they're going to be deep one day, that you don't know if they're going to be suspending, you don't know if they're going to be out moving. So we're going to be giving you some baits today that are going to kind of be the catch-all for these. They're going to kind of mimic those shad that those bass are feeding up during this time period. So bass are looking during this time period to kind of feed up on those. And if you've ever done a lot of wintertime fishing, you know that this time period is when you can really get the biggest bass of the year. That's why you should be going out and fishing during the wintertime, because those bass can just get huge. And if you're not fishing during this time, you're missing out. Could be the time that you could pull in that personal best. All right, guys. So if you like this kind of stuff, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's get going with talking about these baits. The very first bait that we have that is fun to catch fish on year round is the suspending jerkbait. So when it comes to color selection, you know, I'll fish a chartreuse, I'll fish a white, you can fish the ones that are pretty much transparent. They all really work. So look to fish a suspending jerkbait. You can tell I have this big KVD suspending jerkbait on my Mach Pro rod. They really catch fish, and the reason they catch fish is because this is able to stay in front of their face a little bit longer than other baits. So if you're fishing a crankbait where you're just constantly ripping it through the water, those bass that are really slow really don't have time to kind of key in on that. So with that water temperature being very, very low, their blood just isn't circulating like it normally would. So they're going to be in a kind of a slower mode. And that's not saying they're always slow. They can go out and, I don't know, get a spark of energy and just start moving after bait. But for the most part, we're going to be trying to target them being lethargic. So this jerkbait going through the water where you're just kind of ripping it, and the way I fish it, I'll, just like I normally do, maybe just a little bit slower with the pauses. So you might rip it once, let it pause for a couple seconds, rip, and then the next one you might do 3, and you just mix it up that way. You'll jerk it a few times, pause, jerk it some more, pause, and that's all you have to do. And what this is gonna do, those bass that are suspending, let's say you have a bunch of trees out in the middle of your lake and you're trying to fish around those, this right here is gonna catch those suspending bass that you might not get if you're fishing some of these other baits that are gonna be targeted towards the bottom of that water column. So that's kind of where this jerkbait shines. And also, that suspending jerkbait, if you rip it down far enough, it's going to get pretty low down in that water column, and it's going to kind of get those bass that are in the bottom too. So it's kind of the catch-all if you're looking to catch all those bass in different levels of that water column. That's why the jerkbait, in my opinion, is my first go-to bait if I'm trying to look for some wintertime fishing. Okay, the second one we're going to talk about is a jig. And this right here is just a big Strike King Pro model jig with a crawl trailer on it, rage crawl. And the reason I think the jig, in my opinion, is the second go-to bait that I would choose is because it just catches fish all year round. During the summertime, during the fall, spring, wintertime, they all catch big bass. And I think the reason is this thing is just a big profile bait. It looks like a huge protein food source. And you might say, hey, those crawfish are all buried in the mud. Yeah, but there's a lot of other stuff that kind of gets washed down in the water. And you see other people's videos fishing those rat lures, they're fishing those duck lures and everything else. Those bass are just looking to eat a high protein food source, especially during the wintertime when they're not able to get out and move a lot for that bait. They're gonna bite down on this, I promise, if it's in front of their face. So this big profile bait is just awesome. You can really throw it out there, and all I do is kind of just drag this across the bottom very, very slowly. Because let's face it, you don't really know where they're at. There might be a bass on the bottom that is literally sitting there buried in the mud almost. And this comes creeping by just in time for them to strike at it. It's a perfect bait all year round. You're not gonna really get hung up on much. That big weed guard is gonna protect you. I pitch this thing into cover. I bomb a cast out and drag this down the center of the river where I think it's gonna be the deepest. Or if I go to a lake, kind of fishing this really deep as well. I usually don't fish in water that's probably more than 15 or 20 feet deep. A lot of times those lethargic bass aren't gonna go much deeper than that. And the reason being is because shad typically aren't gonna be found schooled up or alone any deeper than that 20 feet range. And there are some exceptions to that, but in general, they're not gonna be much lower than that. So if you can target bass 20 feet and shallower with a big jig, you're gonna be good. You can really power fish these, and that's kind of why I picked the jerkbait and the jig for the first couple ones, is because you can really focus on power fishing these. Even though we're still slowing down to fish them, you can still kind of pick up the pace and run down a bank line or run where you think those bass are gonna be and target them really quickly. Some of these other baits, you're not gonna be able to do that. You're gonna have to fish them a little bit slower. Okay, number 3 on the list is a bait that you definitely need to be using to target wintertime bass, and that is a blade bait. This right here is a Ketchco Death Stalker, and this thing right here is amazing. So this is a little bit differently than most blade baits, and you can fish any type of blade bait, they're gonna work, because this is a very small profile bait. It really mimics that dying bait fish. And this one right here has a little blade on the back of it to kind of add to that fluttering action that this has. And this one doesn't have but one hook up here. Most of them have 2 hooks. I mean, you could take this off and run you another hook back here. Either way, this bait works. All I do is throw this out, and I'm gonna fish it kind of like I would a rattle trap. Let this thing sink to the bottom. This is made out of pretty much solid metal, so it's got a lot of weight to it. Let it sink to the bottom, and I'm just gonna rip it up off the bottom, and it's gonna flutter up, and then it's gonna flutter back down, really mimicking the dying bait fish. That's what a dying bait fish does. You know, they're gonna go up, they're gonna flutter back down. They do all kinds of crazy erratic motions. This right here is gonna give you that crazy erratic motion as well. And it's a good profile size to really key in on pretty much any type of bass. And this right here is a numbers catching bait, not necessarily a big bass catching bait. But if that big bass is there, you're gonna catch a big bass too. So you can't complain when you're out on the water catching a lot of bass. So this right here is gonna get it done. Fish a blade bait this year, I promise you're gonna get on more wintertime bass. Okay, number 4 on the list is pretty much the same bait as this blade bait, and I'm gonna fish it the same way, but it is a completely different type of bait. And that is the rattle trap or a lipless crankbait. The reason I like these rattle traps though, they have a different sound to them than a lot of other lipless crankbaits have. And this shad pattern right here, this straight silver, really assists in kind of targeting those dying shad too. So this right here, fish it the same way. I'm gonna bomb it out and just let it hit the bottom, and I'm gonna rip it up, let it kind of flutter back down, let it hit the bottom again, rip it up, and it's literally gonna flutter pretty much the same way that this one does, except this one has internal rattles to kind of key in those bass. So definitely fish a lipless crankbait this year. You can see I have it tied on my Abu Garcia rod right here. You can tell it has a little bit different sound, but a lipless crankbait works. And you can do the rip it off the bottom, or you can do a yo-yo method where you kind of rip it up, let it sink, rip it up, and it has a little bit of a faster motion to it. Kind of get a feel for the fish if they're kind of more energetic or if they're more lethargic. If they're not moving as much, you're going to want to slow it down and maybe go to this next bait that we're going to talk about. And that is an underspin. This right here is a paddle tail swim bait with an underspin. Once again, really targeting looking like a shad. This blade is going to be spinning. This looks just like a shad. You got this huge exposed hook here. You're really going to get a lot of bites with this one. So what you do, you throw this out. You could fish it if you think the bass are suspending, fish it kind of through the middle of the water column, wherever you think they're at. If you have a fish finder on your boat, definitely use that to kind of see or gauge where those bass are in the water column. If not, you're just going to have to kind of get a feel for it without doing that, okay? You might catch you a couple fish and see where they're at and ask yourself why you caught that. Was it on the bottom? Was it midways in the water column? Either way, you throw this out, and we're gonna fish this a little bit differently in most cases. Definitely if you think they're on the bottom sitting and not moving much, I'm gonna cast this out and literally run it really slowly up off the bottom. This blade might not even be spinning, but it's gonna add to that flash. Those fish are gonna be seeing this, probably beating off the rocks, beating off that cover, and it's gonna kind of key those bass in. And then that paddle tail is gonna be going too. So fish this very slowly. Don't fish it like a normal swim bait or a spinner bait. You're really gonna fish this kind of slower than you normally would. Okay, the last one on the list, and this doesn't necessarily need to be the last one that I would go to. The reason I put it at the very end is because if you have really finicky fish that are just very picky, you've been out on the water for 2 or 3 hours and you haven't caught anything, this is the bait I would go to, and that is a Ned rig. This right here, I have a shad pattern, this white lightning, I think it's white lightning or white smoke, I can't remember. But this right here is also gonna mimic a shad, and you can fish this the slowest of any of these baits. You can cast this out. This thing is gonna stand straight up. The water is gonna make this tail twitch. You can twitch your rod. It's gonna make this tail twitch. This is definitely gonna get those bass going, whether they're slow moving or fast moving, whatever. You're gonna be able to fish this very slow, keep it in front of their face, and just barely move it along. This is gonna get you more bites than maybe any of these other ones, but I put it on the end of it just because this is a more finesse style bait that is gonna kind of pick up the slack if the other ones don't work. For color selection, I'll use green pumpkin. I'll use the peanut butter and jelly where it's got the purple and brown. And the reason being for a lot of these is, you know, a lot of times during the winter you got dirtier water. Sometimes you might have clear water, and that's kind of where the green pumpkin, the more natural style baits can come in. But you want to have something that's darker in profile that's going to catch their eye. And then also the one that looks like a shad. So you can kind of imitate whatever, full spectrum right here. But this works. And I do fish this on the different style Ned rig head. This is the Ned Locks by Z-Man. And it has that extra wide gap hook to where you can fish this weedless. And it has this little bait keeper right here where it's not going to slide down the hook. It's going to keep that up there. You can really fish this completely weedless and not get hung up. So that is where this is 10 times better than the old style jig head made by Z-Man. This is going to catch you a lot of bass. All right, guys, that was breaking down the 6 baits that I would personally throw during the wintertime to target any type of bass out there, smallmouth, largemouth, and spotted bass. These are just going to get the job done for you. They're tried and true. They're proven. And just like this one by Ketchco, it says perfect for targeting fish in cooler water when the bait fish are dying. So look, right there. The manufacturer is even telling you to fish it during the wintertime. So that right there is a testament to how effective these can be. Please go out there, start fishing these. You're gonna catch more fish. If you're wondering what type of gear to throw this on, I'm pretty much gonna throw all of these with the exception of maybe this one and the Ned rig. I'm gonna throw it on a medium heavy power with 10 to 12 pound fluorocarbon. But for those other ones, I'm probably gonna throw it on a medium power spinning combo or a medium power bait caster with some light line. And the beauty of fishing during the wintertime is those bass really aren't as powerful as they are during the summertime. You know, I caught a couple big smallmouth a couple weeks ago, and they really didn't put up a big fight. You know, I could tell when I hooked into them that there was still some weight there, but the fight just wasn't there. With that cold water, that blood's not flowing, they're not gonna be able to produce as much energy to fight. So that's where you can kind of get away during the wintertime with fishing lighter tackle, lighter line, lighter hooks, all of that, and you're still gonna be okay. They're not gonna be able to put up that fight that they normally would. So with that being said, you know, with my spinning combos, I'll still fish 8-10 pound test line with that braid, and that is still gonna get the job done. You're gonna still be sensitive with it with that braid, and then that fluorocarbon leader being 8 to 10 pound test, you're really gonna be able to effectively get that bait down. And in clearer water, they're not gonna see that line. So you can really fish these effectively, and they're not focused on seeing that line. They're gonna be only targeting the bait. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a reference on what you can use to throw all of these baits. And I really think these are effective. So these have really helped me fish the wintertime season and be effective versus the summertime when you're really targeting other types of baits. So you really have to ask yourself, what is out there right now as far as forage that those bass are kind of feeding up on? And that is gonna give you an indication of what you actually need to throw. All right, guys, if you like this video and you found it helpful, please hit that like button, help me out on the channel. Subscribe if you wanna see more videos like this. We are almost to 2,000 subscribers on the channel, so big shout out to all of you guys that have helped out and have stuck around to support the channel for the long term. We're almost nearing that 1 year mark of when I've started the channel. That'll be in March. And I really want to thank everybody that's been supportive so far. All right, guys, I'll catch you in those next videos, and keep it blue collar.